Chapter 1. A New Beginning. The air was heavy with the scent of fresh rain when Caroline stepped off the bus and into the streets of New York City. She had always dreamt of this moment, of arriving in the city that never sleeps, with its endless possibilities and promise of a fresh start. It had taken her years of planning, months of working 2 jobs, and a heart full of hope, but she was finally here. She was free. At 22, Caroline had left her small hometown in Ohio, seeking the kind of adventure she'd only read about in novels. She'd worked hard for this moment, pouring her soul into every job, every late-night shift, dreaming of the day she could step into the vibrant pulse of the city and feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She didn't know exactly what she was searching for. Maybe it was purpose, maybe it was love, or maybe it was simply a place to breathe and exist on her own terms, without the judgment of a small town that had watched her every move. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend Lily back home. Lily. Caroline, I'm so proud of you. I know this is scary, but I know you can do this. Don't forget to call me when you get settled. Promise. Caroline smiled, the words filling her with warmth. Lily had been her rock, the person who had always been there, even when the world seemed like it was falling apart. But now, Caroline was in a place where she could only rely on herself, and that thought both excited and terrified her. She had been in the city for only a few hours, but the energy was already intoxicating. The streets were crowded with people hustling to their next destination, 1,000 different stories unfolding in every direction. The sound of car horns, distant chatter, and the occasional street performer playing his guitar created a constant hum in the air. The bright lights and towering skyscrapers made her feel small, yet somehow in this massive city, she also felt like she could be anyone. She could be anything. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was an email from the temp agency where she had applied for work. She opened it quickly. Subject: Your application. Dear Caroline, we're excited to inform you that we'd like to move forward with your application for the assistant position at Hinton & Company. We would love to have you meet with us for an in-person interview. Please come to our office tomorrow at 10 a.m. We look forward to meeting you in person. Best regards, Margaret Hinton. Hinton & Company. A smile tugged at Caroline's lips as her heart raced. The job she had applied for was everything she had hoped for. An entry-level position at one of the most well-known marketing firms in the city. She had no experience in the industry, but the thought of getting her foot in the door was enough to make her stomach flip with excitement. She took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. Everything was falling into place, just as she had dreamed. Tomorrow could be the start of something incredible, a step toward building the future she wanted. Caroline was so lost in the moment that she didn't notice the man walking toward her, his arm outstretched as he bumped into her shoulder. She stumbled back slightly but managed to catch herself just in time. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said quickly, looking up at the stranger with wide eyes. The man's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze momentarily lingering before he flashed her an apologetic smile. He was tall, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that screamed success. His hair was dark, neatly combed, and his jawline was sharp enough to make her breath catch for a moment. "No harm done," he replied with a slight chuckle, his voice smooth and confident. Caroline felt a strange flutter in her chest, an unexpected jolt of attraction that surprised her. This man was effortlessly charming, and yet there was something about him that made her uneasy. Maybe it was the way he held himself, or the way he didn't seem to notice the chaos around him, as though the world revolved around him. It wasn't arrogance, no, it was something else. It was confidence, the kind of confidence that made everyone around him feel just a little bit smaller. "Still," he added, "I should have paid more attention." Caroline nodded, her face flushing a little from the lingering awkwardness of their encounter. She should have walked away, given him a quick smile and moved on. But instead, she found herself standing there, caught in the moment. "I'm Caroline," she said, surprising even herself by introducing herself. The man tilted his head slightly, as if he were considering her for a moment before offering his hand. "Liam," he said simply, his grip firm. "It's a pleasure." The handshake lasted a bit longer than expected, and Caroline could feel a tension in the air, an unspoken connection between them that left her slightly breathless. She tried to push the feeling aside, reminding herself that she was here for a reason. She had just arrived in the city, she had a job interview tomorrow, and she wasn't here to get distracted by a stranger. But Liam wasn't about to let her go that easily. His eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel as though he was trying to read her, to understand who she was in the few seconds they'd spent together. "Well, Caroline," he said, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips, "I'm sure we'll cross paths again." Before she could respond, Liam turned and disappeared into the bustling crowd, leaving Caroline standing there, her heart still racing from the encounter. She shook her head as if trying to clear her thoughts, but something in her couldn't quite let go of the strange moment they'd shared. Shaking her head again, she adjusted the strap of her bag and turned to continue her walk down the street, the sound of her footsteps lost in the cacophony of the city. She couldn't let herself get distracted. There was too much ahead of her, too much to look forward to. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life in the city, this new chapter she was starting, might just have more surprises in store than she had expected. And one of those surprises might just be a man named Liam. Chapter 2. The Unlikely Encounter. The next morning, Caroline woke up early, the excitement of her first day in New York making sleep feel like a distant memory. The small studio apartment she had rented in Greenwich Village was modest, but to Caroline, it felt like the perfect sanctuary. She had spent her last few days organizing the space, unpacking her things into the minimal furniture she had brought with her, and slowly starting to feel like she belonged in this city that pulsed with life and opportunity. She looked at the clock on her nightstand, 8:15 a.m. She had enough time to grab a quick breakfast before heading to her interview. The butterflies in her stomach danced around in anxious anticipation. She was ready for this. She had prepared for weeks, researching the company, learning everything she could about the role, and rehearsing her answers to potential questions. Caroline had always been meticulous, and today was no different. She wouldn't let anything stand in her way. The cafe on the corner served the best coffee in the area, and she had quickly become a regular, so she slipped on her coat and headed out. The cold air of New York City greeted her like a wake-up call, bracing her senses and making her feel alive. It was a perfect day, the kind of crisp, blue-skied morning that seemed to promise good things ahead. As she walked the 2 blocks to the cafe, her mind kept returning to Liam, the man she had bumped into yesterday. Their brief encounter had been odd, to say the least. The way his eyes had locked onto hers with such intensity left her wondering about him, about what kind of person he really was. She couldn't help but wonder if he was someone important. New York had that kind of energy, didn't it? You could meet anyone, and they could be the key to unlocking a new world. But she wasn't here for distractions. She wasn't here to get lost in a whirlwind romance or get caught up in someone she barely knew. She had come to build a life for herself, to prove that she was capable of more than just small-town dreams. After a quick breakfast of a bagel and coffee, Caroline made her way to the office building where the interview was scheduled. It was only a 5-minute walk, but as she approached the towering glass structure, her nerves began to build. She had done everything she could to prepare, but nothing could truly prepare her for this moment. Her fingers fumbled with the strap of her bag as she entered the lobby, her heart pounding. The elevator ride to the 17th floor seemed to take forever. Each floor that passed made her feel more and more out of place. The walls were sleek, polished glass that reflected her nervous expression back at her. She couldn't help but wonder if she was really ready for this, if she was truly cut out for a place like Hinton and Company, with its high-rise offices and people who wore suits that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. When the doors finally dinged open, she walked into a modern office space. The receptionist looked up from her desk, a pleasant smile lighting her face as she greeted Caroline. "Welcome to Hinton and Company. You must be Caroline. We've been expecting you. Please take a seat. Ms. Hinton will be right with you." Caroline forced a smile as she sat down in one of the sleek chairs. She could hear the muffled hum of conversations, the click of heels on polished floors, and the faint sound of phones ringing. Felt like a different world. A world that had nothing to do with the small, quiet town she had left behind. The wait was short. Moments later, Margaret Hinton, an impeccably put-together woman in her late 40s, walked into the lobby. She had a no-nonsense air about her, her sharp eyes quickly scanning Caroline up and down before offering a firm handshake. "Caroline, it's a pleasure. Come right in. We've been looking forward to meeting you." Caroline followed her through a set of glass doors, into an expansive modern office that looked out over the skyline. Margaret gestured for her to sit at a small conference table, the space minimalistic but stylish. Caroline sat down, crossing her legs nervously, but trying to maintain her composure. "So, Caroline," Margaret began, taking a seat opposite her. "Your resume is impressive. A degree in communications, internships in digital marketing. What made you decide to apply to Hinton and Company?" Caroline took a deep breath. This was what she had practiced for. She had to be confident. "I've always had a passion for marketing," she began, keeping her voice steady. "I believe in the power of storytelling, and Hinton and Company has an excellent reputation for creating campaigns that truly resonate with people. I want to learn from the best and contribute to the innovative work you're doing here." Margaret nodded, her expression unreadable as she scribbled something down on a notepad. Caroline's heart pounded in her chest, but she pushed forward, answering each question with precision and focus. The interview was going well, too well, she thought. Her nerves began to settle as she realized that she wasn't just trying to impress Margaret. She was beginning to see herself in this world, in this space, and it felt right. "I like your answers, Caroline," Margaret said finally, her lips curving into a small smile. "But tell me, what's something you've had to overcome? A challenge that shaped you?" Caroline's mind went back to her last year in Ohio, to the sudden loss of her mother, the way her world had been shattered. But she didn't want to talk about that. Not yet. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her gaze meeting Margaret's. "I've always been the kind of person who prefers to figure things out on my own. But when I moved here, I realized that I couldn't do everything alone. Asking for help, letting myself trust others, is something I'm learning to do. And that's not always easy. But I think it's made me more adaptable, more willing to take risks." Margaret's eyes softened slightly, and Caroline felt a flicker of something. Respect, maybe, or approval. It was enough to make her feel like she had finally found a place where she belonged. After the interview, Margaret walked her to the elevator, giving her a warm smile. "I think you'll be a great fit here, Caroline. You'll hear from us soon." Caroline stepped into the elevator, her heart soaring with hope. She was one step closer. But as the elevator doors closed and it began to ascend, a familiar voice caught her off guard. "Caroline, wait." She turned, her stomach flipping as she saw him. Liam, standing in the lobby, his sharp features framed by the sleek office building behind him. The last person she expected to see. Her pulse quickened and her thoughts spiraled. What was he doing here? Did he work at Hinton and Company? Was this just a coincidence? Chapter 3: Unexpected Turns. Caroline's heart skipped a beat as she turned toward the sound of Liam's voice. He was standing by the entrance to the office lobby, looking every bit the polished, confident man she had encountered the day before on the busy city streets. But there was something different about him now, something that made her breath catch in her throat. Was it the way he seemed to belong in this towering corporate building? His presence effortlessly commanding the room? Or was it the slight smirk that tugged at the corners of his mouth as he watched her with an expression that made her feel like she was the only person in the room? "Caroline, right?" Liam asked, his voice smooth and sure. She swallowed hard, trying to process the odd feeling that suddenly swirled inside her. She had just left a successful interview, something she had worked so hard for, and now here he was, standing before her like some unexpected twist in a story she hadn't planned to tell. "You," she said, trying to steady her voice. "What are you doing here?" Liam's smirk deepened, but there was something in his eyes now, something that almost seemed apologetic. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing," he replied, his tone playful yet filled with an underlying seriousness. "I work here." Well, technically, I consult for Hinton and Company on their high-profile projects. I didn't expect to see you in this world, but here we are. Caroline stood frozen for a moment, her mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. He worked here, at Hinton and Company. She couldn't believe it. The same Liam who had casually bumped into her on the streets yesterday. The same man who had made her heart race for no apparent reason. The elevator doors behind her opened, and another employee stepped out, eyeing the scene for a moment before quickly walking away. Caroline felt the air around her grow heavier, like the world was watching. I didn't know you were connected to Hinton and Company, Caroline managed to say, her words coming out slowly as she tried to keep her composure. I just had an interview here, actually. Liam raised an eyebrow. Is that right? What position? She cleared her throat, now feeling slightly self-conscious under his gaze. I applied for the assistant marketing position, she said, trying to keep the conversation neutral. He didn't seem surprised by this. In fact, his gaze softened for a brief moment, and for the first time, Caroline noticed something behind his confidence. A touch of vulnerability. You know, Caroline, Liam said, his voice more serious now. I don't usually do this, but I think it's a good thing you're here. You're exactly the kind of person this company needs. Caroline blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. She hadn't expected him to say anything like that, especially after their brief, somewhat awkward encounter yesterday. She had almost dismissed him as someone who was just passing through her life for a fleeting moment. But now, standing before him in this high-powered corporate building, everything felt different. The strange energy between them had shifted, and she was suddenly aware of the deep connection that lingered between them, whether she liked it or not. You really think so? Caroline asked, feeling a strange mixture of nervousness and curiosity. She wasn't sure why, but she found herself looking into Liam's eyes, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. Liam nodded, his expression steady. I do. I've worked with this company long enough to know what it takes to succeed here. And I think you've got it, whatever it is. You're driven. You know what you want. And that's rare. Caroline wasn't sure what to make of his praise. Was this just him being polite, or was there more to it? She'd seen his kind before, the confident, charming men who could talk anyone into anything. Was this one of those moments? Was he just trying to make her feel good? But there was something different about Liam. His words didn't come across as insincere or rehearsed. In fact, they made her feel as though he had seen something in her, something that no one else had bothered to notice. She wasn't sure if she liked it, but the feeling was there, and she couldn't ignore it. Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened again, and Margaret Hinton stepped out, her sharp eyes flicking between Caroline and Liam. Liam, she greeted him with a nod, her expression unreadable. I didn't expect to see you here today. Are you here to drop off some paperwork? Liam's eyes shifted toward Margaret, and for a brief second, something passed between them. It was subtle, but Caroline caught it. A shift in the air, an unspoken understanding. Liam's usual confidence seemed to falter, just for a moment, and Caroline wondered what that could mean. I'm just leaving, Liam said quickly, his voice shifting back to his usual smooth, easy tone. But it's good to see you again, Caroline. I'll be seeing you around, I'm sure. And just like that, he was gone, walking briskly toward the exit with a final glance over his shoulder. Caroline stood there for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. The brief conversation, the way he had praised her, the strange connection between them. It all felt like something out of a dream. Margaret turned to Caroline, her professional mask back in place. Well, that was certainly unexpected, she said with a raised eyebrow. But no matter. The interview went very well. You're exactly what we're looking for. Caroline blinked, still reeling from the encounter with Liam. She nodded, forcing herself to focus on the moment. Thank you, she said softly. Margaret's expression softened ever so slightly, though she quickly masked it. We'll be in touch soon. Have a great rest of your day, Caroline. With a final handshake, Caroline stepped into the elevator, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. As the doors closed, she glanced back at the lobby, half expecting Liam to be standing there, watching her. But the place was empty. The only thing left was a strange sense of unease that lingered in the air. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was an email from the temp agency. "Congratulations, Caroline. We are pleased to offer you the position at Hinton & Company. Please review the attached contract for your start date." Caroline stared at the email, her heart racing. She had done it. She had secured the job. This was the opportunity she had come to New York for. But even as she celebrated the victory, she couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with Liam had only just begun. The city was full of surprises, and something told her that Liam wasn't just another passing moment. He was going to be part of her story in ways she couldn't yet understand. And she wasn't sure if that thought excited or terrified her. Chapter 4: A New World. The next few days passed in a blur of excitement and uncertainty. Caroline's first few weeks in New York were a whirlwind, working long hours at Hinton & Company, trying to find her rhythm in a city that never slowed down, and of course still trying to figure out what the heck was going on with Liam. Her first day at the company had been everything she had hoped for and more. The office was sleek and modern, and everyone there was incredibly welcoming, even if they spoke in a language that felt foreign to her. Terms and phrases she had heard in passing, but now needed to learn and understand. She had to work quickly to catch up, but she found herself driven by the same energy that had carried her through getting to this point in her life. The job was exactly what she needed. An opportunity to prove herself, to show that she belonged here, and to dive into the world of marketing and advertising. She felt proud to be part of a team working on projects with such high stakes. From brainstorming sessions to executing campaign strategies, every moment felt like a chance to grow. But despite her success at work, there was one thing that continually tugged at her mind: Liam. She hadn't expected to see him again, especially not so soon. Yet every now and then, she would catch glimpses of him around the office. He was always moving with purpose, speaking in low, serious tones to executives, or reviewing contracts in private meetings. His presence felt like a shadow that loomed over her work, a constant reminder that he was part of a world she hadn't quite figured out yet. It was in the midst of a hectic week that Caroline finally saw him again. She was sitting in the break room, taking a quick lunch when the door opened, and in walked Liam. His usual confident stride had a purposeful edge to it. He barely noticed her at first, his attention focused on his phone as he scrolled through messages, but when he looked up and saw her sitting there, his expression shifted, a small smile curling at the corners of his lips. "Caroline," he greeted her, his tone light, but there was something else there, something deeper that she couldn't quite place. "Fancy seeing you here." Caroline's pulse quickened at the sound of his voice. She had spent so much time trying to push him out of her thoughts, yet there he was, breaking through the noise of her busy day like it was nothing. "Liam," she replied, trying to sound casual as she took a sip of her coffee, her heart racing. "How's everything?" Liam leaned against the counter, eyes scanning the room as he made himself comfortable. "Busy. Same as always. But that's the New York grind, right?" Caroline nodded, her mind whirling. "I'm still adjusting, honestly. Everything moves so fast here." He gave her an amused glance. "It doesn't stop, trust me. But you'll get used to it. You've got that look, determined, ready to conquer it all." She couldn't help but chuckle, though she felt a strange warmth from his words. She didn't expect him to notice her that way. "I'm trying to keep up," Caroline said, offering a slight smile. "Just trying to stay on top of everything." Liam nodded, his expression softening as he took a step closer. For a moment, they just stood there, surrounded by the hum of the office and the clinking of coffee cups, an odd sense of familiarity building between them. Caroline tried to focus on the conversation, but the way Liam's presence seemed to fill up the room, making her feel both at ease and nervous at the same time, was a little overwhelming. "You're doing great," Liam said, his voice sincere this time. "I've seen the work you've done so far. You're impressing everyone here." Caroline blinked, surprised by his words. She had never expected him to pay that much attention to her work, let alone compliment her on it. His approval meant more than she cared to admit. Before she could respond, the door to the break room opened again, and another colleague entered, interrupting the moment. Liam gave Caroline a small nod before turning toward the other person, his easy charm back in place. "Excuse me," he said, flashing Caroline a smile as he walked toward the colleague. Caroline watched him go, her heart still fluttering from their brief exchange. She knew it was nothing, just a casual conversation in the break room, but something about the way he spoke to her, the way he saw her, felt different. The rest of the day passed by in a blur of meetings, emails, and endless to-do lists. But Caroline couldn't shake the strange sensation that lingered after seeing Liam again. It was as if the walls between them were slowly starting to crumble, and the more she saw him, the more she felt pulled into his orbit. That evening, after another long day at the office, Caroline decided to take a walk. She needed to clear her head, to sort through the jumble of thoughts and emotions that had been swirling around in her mind since her first encounter with Liam. There was something about him, something magnetic that she couldn't explain, and the more she tried to push it away, the more she felt drawn to him. She wandered through the streets of Manhattan, taking in the twinkling lights, the laughter echoing from bars, and the hum of the city that never slept. New York was full of energy, but it also felt lonely at times. Caroline found herself wondering if she would ever truly feel like she belonged here, in a city so vast and impersonal. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend Lily, back in Ohio. "Lily, how's the big city, Car? Have you met anyone interesting yet?" Caroline smiled at the text, though a part of her hesitated to reply. What could she say about Liam? The truth was, she wasn't even sure what to make of him herself. "Caroline, it's amazing but overwhelming. I'm still trying to get my bearings. No one special yet, just figuring out work and life." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, shoving the phone back in her bag and continuing her walk through the city. The bustling energy of New York had always felt like it could absorb her, like it could take her somewhere she didn't yet understand. And maybe that was the point. She didn't need to have everything figured out. Not yet. As she reached the edge of Central Park, Caroline stopped, taking a deep breath of the crisp air. The city was alive with possibilities, and for the first time she felt like she was on the edge of something big. Whether that something was her career, her future, or even a connection with someone like Liam, she wasn't sure. But one thing was certain. Her life in New York was just beginning, and she wasn't ready to let it slip away without exploring every possibility. Chapter 5: Crossed Paths. The weeks that followed were a blur of work, late nights, and growing familiarity with the city. Caroline found herself adjusting more and more to life in New York. The pace of it, the constant hum of people, the rush of taxis, the swarms of faces and stories in every direction. It was starting to feel less like chaos and more like the rhythm of something that was finally making sense. Her job at Hinton and Company kept her busy. It was a job she loved, and the team she worked with was dynamic, encouraging, and eager to teach her. She had already started contributing to various projects, taking on tasks that grew more important with each passing day. Her excitement was palpable, and it didn't take long for her colleagues to notice her determination and energy. But despite everything going well professionally, her mind still often wandered back to Liam. She hadn't expected him to play such a big role in her thoughts. He had quickly become an enigma, someone whose presence she couldn't ignore, no matter how hard she tried. It had started with the casual encounters in the office, each one leaving her more intrigued. There was always that same easy confidence about him, that sense of control. Yet, there was something deeper in his eyes whenever their gazes met. She couldn't figure it out. Was it simply his charm that drew her in? Or was it something more? Something more complex? Maybe even something she was afraid to unravel. The city was vast, yet she kept crossing paths with him, more than she had anticipated. In meetings, at work events, coffee breaks, every time their conversations remained brief, but there was always an underlying tension in the air. Caroline couldn't help but wonder if the connection was just in her mind, or if he actually felt something too. One late afternoon, as she walked back to the office after a particularly long meeting, she found herself stopping at a coffee cart outside the building. She had planned to get in, get the caffeine boost, and head back up to her desk. But as she stood there, waiting for her order, she heard that familiar voice behind her. Caroline! She froze, not needing to turn around to know who it was. Her heart gave a soft skip, as if it too recognized the sound of Liam's voice. She turned, finally meeting his gaze. He was leaning against the side of the building, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket, his sharp features softened by the late afternoon light. There was a look on his face that Caroline couldn't quite place, a blend of curiosity, amusement, and something else. Maybe even something warmer, like he was actually glad to see her. "Hi," she said, the word slipping from her lips before she could think about it. He smiled, and the air between them seemed to shift in a way that Caroline couldn't explain. "You look like you could use a break," Liam said, his tone playful yet oddly reassuring. "Long day." Caroline laughed softly, her eyes briefly flicking to the coffee cart as she nodded. "Definitely. Meetings, presentations. You know how it is." She paused, then added, "I've been meaning to ask, how long have you been working with Hinton and Company?" Liam's expression shifted slightly, the hint of a smile fading as he considered her question. "Long enough to know how to survive the madness," he replied with a quiet chuckle. "But it's been a while now. I've had the opportunity to work on some really interesting projects here." Caroline nodded, then met his gaze again. "I guess that's one of the perks of working in such a fast-paced environment. Always something new." "Exactly," Liam agreed. "But it's also about the people you work with. The team here is full of talent, and I've learned a lot from them." His eyes lingered on her for a moment, and for the briefest second, Caroline thought she saw something else there, something more personal than professional. The awkward silence stretched between them for a moment before Liam cleared his throat, his gaze flickering toward the cart. "How about we grab a coffee and talk about the work we're doing? Just to take a break, you know? It's good to talk to someone who gets it." Caroline hesitated for a second. It wasn't that she didn't want to talk to him, it was just unexpected. She'd thought their previous interactions had been simple, fleeting moments, yet here he was, suggesting they spend time together outside of the office. But then again, she thought, what was the harm? It wasn't like she had anything else planned, and there was something about him that felt familiar, comfortable. Despite their professional roles, despite the odd dynamic between them, it didn't feel forced. "Sure," she said, offering a small smile. "I'd like that." They walked together toward a nearby bench, taking their coffees as they settled in, the city bustling around them as they spoke casually. Caroline tried to ignore the feeling in her chest, the fluttering sensation that made her question why it felt so natural to sit with him, to share small talk, to look at him as though they weren't just two colleagues passing through the same world. "I noticed you seem to thrive here," Liam said after a few minutes of easy conversation. "You've been making quite an impression. People talk about your work ethic." Caroline chuckled nervously. "I don't know about that. I'm just trying to keep up. Everyone here is so talented. But I guess I'm getting the hang of it." Liam's eyes softened as he gazed at her, his expression unreadable. "I've seen people struggle when they first come in. It's not an easy place to start. But you've got something about you, Caroline. I can tell you're going places." Her heart skipped, and she looked down at her coffee, unsure how to respond. She had always been the type to brush off compliments, to deflect rather than accept. But coming from him, those words felt different. They carried weight. "Thank you," she said softly, meeting his gaze again. "That means a lot." For a moment, the noise of the city seemed to fade as they sat there, two people who had only just started to understand the impact they had on each other. The world around them continued its unrelenting pace, but for just a moment, everything seemed to slow. "Caroline." Liam's voice broke the silence, his tone unexpectedly serious. "You're not just here to make an impression, you know. You're here to build something. To create your own path. Caroline tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. His words felt like they meant something deeper, like he wasn't just talking about work anymore. Before she could respond, however, the sound of her phone buzzing in her bag interrupted the moment. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was an email notification from her boss, asking her to come back to the office for an urgent meeting. I guess that's my cue, Caroline said, standing up, her heart suddenly racing. Liam also stood up, his expression more intense than before. I'll walk you back. It's the least I can do. As they walked together toward the office, the weight of the conversation hung in the air. Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that the lines between work and personal were beginning to blur, and that her story with Liam was just starting to unfold. Chapter 6. The unspoken connection. The following week felt like a blur of busy days and sleepless nights. Caroline was adjusting more to the rhythm of the office, finally starting to feel like she belonged, like she was earning her place. Every day, she was proving to herself that she had what it took to be here. She was learning from the best, taking on new challenges, and slowly beginning to understand the inner workings of Hinton and Company. She had settled into her role in the marketing department, working alongside a team of talented professionals who had quickly become colleagues she admired. Yet, despite her successes, there was still the lingering presence of Liam. It wasn't just the occasional encounter at the coffee cart or the fleeting exchanges in the office that made her heart race. It was the way their connection seemed to deepen every time they spoke. The more she tried to ignore him, the more he seemed to find his way into her thoughts, his words echoing in her mind long after their conversations had ended. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had happened, but it had. They were now more than just colleagues who occasionally shared a cup of coffee or exchanged pleasantries in the hallway. It was clear that there was something more, something unsaid, hanging between them like an invisible thread. The tension between them was palpable every time their eyes met, and Caroline couldn't ignore it any longer. She found herself wondering what exactly Liam wanted from her. Was it just friendship? Was it something more? One Thursday afternoon, when she was buried under a mountain of paperwork, a sudden knock at her office door startled her from her concentration. She looked up to find Liam standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his gaze that immediately made Caroline's heart skip a beat. "Hey," he said, his voice low and warm, though it had that typical smoothness that seemed to accompany him everywhere he went. "Got a minute?" Caroline blinked, surprised to see him standing there. "Sure," she said, setting her papers aside and gesturing to the chair across from her. "What's up?" Liam walked into the office, the familiar scent of his cologne filling the space as he settled into the chair across from her. He looked around for a moment, as if taking in the details of her workspace. The clean lines of the desk, the way the sunlight poured through the windows, the small potted plant sitting on the corner of her desk that she'd bought on a whim a few weeks ago. "I know you've been busy," he said, his tone shifting into something more thoughtful. "I thought maybe you could use a break. I was wondering if you'd want to grab dinner tonight. Just to talk. About anything. Work, life. Whatever." Caroline's stomach fluttered at the invitation. Casual dinner. It sounded harmless enough, yet the way he asked, the way his gaze lingered on hers, made her heart race in a way that she hadn't anticipated. She hadn't expected this. Not like this. I'd like that," Caroline said, trying to sound casual, though her voice wavered slightly. "But are you sure? I know you've got a lot going on too." Liam gave her one of his signature smirks. "I've got time. I'm sure we can find a place that doesn't involve discussing contracts and strategy." She laughed at that, feeling a sudden release of tension that had been building in her chest for days. "Okay," she said, her smile widening. "Where do you want to go?" Liam looked at her for a long moment before answering, his eyes still intense but now softened by a hint of something else, something warmer. "There's a place downtown I like. Not too fancy. Just good food. How about I pick you up at 7? Caroline couldn't help but nod, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Sounds perfect. The rest of the day felt like a blur. She couldn't concentrate on anything except the upcoming dinner with Liam. What was this? A date? Or just two colleagues sharing a meal to unwind? She had no idea, but the uncertainty only seemed to make the anticipation grow. The more she thought about it, the more her mind raced with questions. What did Liam want from her? What was the real reason behind his invitation? As the clock ticked closer to 7, Caroline found herself standing in front of the mirror in her apartment, carefully considering her outfit. She hadn't planned on this, hadn't expected the evening to feel like this. But there she was, standing before her reflection, nervous and excited at once. A soft knock on her door broke her from her thoughts. Caroline's heart skipped again, and she rushed to answer it. Standing there in front of her was Liam, looking effortlessly handsome in a dark jacket and jeans. His hair slightly tousled as if he had just stepped out of a magazine cover shoot. "You look great," he said, his voice low and sincere as he looked her over. "Thanks," she said, her own nerves making her voice softer than usual. "You too." Liam smiled, his eyes lighting up as he leaned against the doorframe. "Shall we?" They made their way to his car, the cool evening air brushing against her skin as she climbed into the passenger seat. The city was alive with lights and movement, but it felt like it was just the two of them in that moment. The drive was quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it was oddly peaceful, with Liam occasionally making a comment about the traffic or pointing out the sights around them. It didn't take long to reach the restaurant, a small, cozy Italian place tucked away on a quiet street downtown. The moment they walked inside, the atmosphere changed. The dim lighting, the soft hum of quiet conversation, the gentle clink of glasses. It all felt different than the fast-paced world of the office. This was their space, their time to be themselves, away from the hustle of work. They were seated at a small, intimate table near the window. The waiter brought them drinks, and they settled into easy conversation. At first, it was all light, about the city, their favorite foods, the things they liked to do in their spare time. But then, as the night wore on, the conversation began to deepen. "So, how's everything really going?" Liam asked, his eyes focused on her with that same intensity she had seen before. "I know you've been working hard, but I mean, how are you? Like, really?" Caroline was taken aback by the question. No one had really asked her that in a while. Not in a way that felt genuine. She had been so focused on making her career work, on pushing forward, that she hadn't really stopped to consider her own well-being. "I'm adjusting," she said, her voice quieter now. "It's not easy, you know. Sometimes it feels like everything's moving so fast, and I'm just trying to keep up." Liam nodded, his expression softening. "I get that. I've been in your shoes. Can be overwhelming. But you've got this, Caroline. I see the way you work. You're stronger than you realize." She looked at him, surprised by his words. There was something in his gaze that made her heart beat a little faster. Maybe it was his sincerity, or maybe it was the way he was seeing her. Not just as an employee, but as someone who mattered. "You don't know what it means to hear you say that," Caroline said quietly, her voice carrying more emotion than she intended. "I'm not sure I believe it myself, but it feels good to hear someone else say it." And just like that, the world around them faded away. Chapter 7. Unraveling Secrets. The next few days seemed to pass in a haze. Caroline found herself walking around with a lingering warmth from that evening with Liam, unable to shake the feeling that something significant had shifted between them. Their dinner had been everything she didn't expect. Easy, comfortable, full of genuine conversation, and yet there was an undeniable tension between them. It wasn't just the chemistry she felt whenever they shared a look or brushed against each other. It was more than that. It was a deeper connection, something unspoken, something both of them were dancing around, unsure of how to handle it. She tried to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting back to their conversations. Liam had said things that had caught her off guard, words that hinted at a deeper understanding of her than she was ready for. He'd made her feel seen in a way that she wasn't used to. It was confusing, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. The days were busy. Caroline's tasks at Hinton and Company kept her on her toes, and she continued to thrive, impressing her colleagues with her dedication and creativity. But every time she saw Liam in the office, a rush of emotions would flood her. A mix of excitement, fear, curiosity, and something else she couldn't put into words. She had noticed a few small things about him. Things that suggested he wasn't just the confident, collected executive everyone else saw. There were moments when his guard would drop, when his eyes would soften, and she could see the complexity beneath the polished surface. He was more than just the high-powered figure she had assumed him to be. And that only made him more intriguing. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon, nearly a week after their dinner, that Caroline received a message that would shift everything. Her phone buzzed in the middle of a meeting, and she glanced at the screen, only to find that it was a text from Liam. "Liam, can we talk later? Something I need to tell you. It's important." Her heart immediately skipped. Something important. The words echoed in her mind as she tried to focus on the rest of the meeting. She couldn't concentrate. What could he possibly want to talk about? Was it about work? Or was it something else? A part of her was eager to find out, but another part of her was terrified that this would change everything. After the meeting, Caroline texted back, her fingers trembling slightly. "Caroline, sure. When? I'm free in an hour." Liam's response was almost immediate. "Liam, I'll pick you up at 6. I know a place. Let's just talk, okay?" Caroline felt a knot form in her stomach. What did he mean by "let's just talk"? Why was it so urgent? There was no clarity in his message, but the vague tone only seemed to raise more questions. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as Caroline's mind raced. Every possible scenario played out in her head, but none of them made any sense. Was he going to confess something? Was this the moment everything between them would change? By 6 p.m., Caroline was pacing her apartment, trying to shake off the anxiety that had built up. Her mind was in overdrive, and her heart was pounding in her chest. What if this was the moment when she found out everything she hadn't known about Liam? What if he had secrets he'd been hiding? Could this be the end of whatever strange, unspoken connection they shared? There was a knock at her door. Her breath hitched as she opened it, and there stood Liam. He looked the same, dressed casually, but there was something in his eyes, something different. His usual confidence was replaced by a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite place. "Caroline," he greeted, his voice low and a little tense. "Ready?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I'm ready. Let's go." They walked to his car in silence, the rain falling lightly around them. It wasn't the usual kind of quiet. This was the kind of silence that made everything feel heavy, like the air was thick with unspoken words. When they arrived at the small cafe he had chosen, Liam led her to a quiet corner booth. The lights were dim, the soft hum of conversation filling the space around them, but it felt as though they were in a world all their own. Caroline took a seat, her nerves bubbling to the surface, but she tried her best to mask it with a forced smile. "So," she said, trying to break the tension, "what's going on, Liam? You said you needed to talk." He sat across from her, his hands clasped together in front of him. He seemed deep in thought, his gaze flicking to her, then away. Finally he met her eyes, and for a moment there was something raw in his expression, vulnerable, uncertain. It wasn't the Liam she had seen in the office. This was a different side of him, a side that made her heart race and her breath catch. "Caroline," he began slowly, his voice almost a whisper. "There's something I should have told you from the beginning. Something I've been keeping from you." Her heart stopped for a moment. What was he talking about? Was this the moment where everything unraveled? Liam took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he let out a quiet sigh. "The truth is, I didn't just ask you to dinner because I wanted to get to know you. I wanted to know you because I've been watching you. I've been paying attention to you, even before you started working at Hinton and Company." Caroline blinked, her mind trying to process what he was saying. "What do you mean?" You've been watching me. Why? Liam seemed to wrestle with his words for a moment before speaking again. His voice more intense this time. I know this might sound crazy, but I've known you for a long time. Longer than you think. Caroline's confusion only deepened. I don't understand. How could you know me before? He hesitated before leaning in slightly, his eyes locking with hers. I'm not just a senior executive at Hinton and Company, Caroline. I'm part of something much bigger than that. Something I can't explain in a simple conversation. But I can tell you this. You've been part of my life in ways you never even knew. Caroline's breath caught in her throat, a sense of dread creeping into her chest. What was he saying? This was beyond anything she could have ever expected. What do you mean? She asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam closed his eyes, looking almost tortured by the weight of the words he had to say. Caroline, I'm not just some guy you met at work. I've been following you for years, keeping track of everything you've done. I know what you've been through, I know your struggles. And I've been a part of them from the shadows. The world around Caroline seemed to slow. Her mind was reeling, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of what he was telling her. Was this some kind of joke? Some twisted game? Or was this really happening? Liam, I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. Why? Why didn't you tell me sooner? He looked at her with a pained expression. Because I didn't want you to know the truth until I was ready to tell you. And now, I don't know how to take it all back. The words hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. And as she sat there, staring at him, she realized that the world she had built for herself in New York, the world she had worked so hard to carve out, was about to unravel in ways she hadn't anticipated. Chapter 8. The Truth Unveiled. Caroline sat frozen at the small cafe table, her mind whirling, trying to process Liam's words. The world around them, filled with the soft chatter of other diners, seemed to fade into the background. It was as if she was in a bubble, her eyes locked onto Liam's, but her thoughts scattered, trying to comprehend the situation. He's been watching me for years. The words echoed in her mind, louder than the ambient noise of the restaurant. The revelation was enough to send a chill down her spine. She had thought she knew Liam, seen him as an ambitious, charming man who had grown into his role at Hinton and Company. But this was different. This was something darker, something deeper. You've been following me. Caroline's voice broke the silence between them, trembling with disbelief and a touch of anger. For years. How could you not tell me that? Liam looked down at his hands, which were still resting on the table, now slightly clenched. I didn't want to scare you away, he said softly, his voice almost apologetic, as though he understood the weight of what he was admitting. I wanted to get to know you first, in the right way. Not as the stranger who's just been keeping track of your life from the shadows. Caroline shook her head, struggling to make sense of it all. But why? Why would you do that? And what do you mean by keeping track of my life? I don't understand. Liam took a deep breath, his eyes darkening as though he was grappling with something inside. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering as if he was preparing to reveal something much larger than he had already shared. There's a lot I didn't tell you when we first met. A lot I couldn't tell you. But now I don't have a choice. He paused, his gaze flickering to the window as though searching for the right words in the streetlights outside. Then, looking back at Caroline, he spoke with a quiet intensity. I've been part of an organization, one that's connected to people you don't know. And the reason I was watching you, the reason I've been in your life all this time, is because you're part of it too. Caroline's heart thudded in her chest. Her mind raced, trying to catch up with the surreal nature of what Liam was saying. Part of it too. What did that even mean? This felt like some twisted plot out of a spy novel, not the reality she had been living. You're part of what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the tension in her throat, the weight of every word she said hanging heavily between them. Liam exhaled, looking uncomfortable but resolute. I can't explain everything right now, Caroline. But I need you to understand something. There's more to you than you realize. There's a reason you were brought to Hinton and Company, why you're here, why everything in your life has led up to this moment. He leaned closer, his eyes focused on hers, as though trying to impart some secret, some hidden truth. You're part of something bigger than just your career. Bigger than you and me. And I've been tasked with watching you, with making sure you understood that. Before it's too late. Caroline felt a strange sensation building in her chest, somewhere between panic and curiosity. It was like her entire world was shifting, crumbling away under her feet, and she had no idea where the ground was anymore. What are you saying? Are you trying to tell me I'm involved in some secret organization? Her words were laced with disbelief, though part of her could feel the weight of what Liam was saying, a part of her that was unnerved by how calm and collected he sounded. Liam's gaze softened for a moment, as if he were sorry for what he was about to reveal. I'm telling you that everything you've done, everything you've worked for, has been part of a larger plan. You were brought here to New York to Hinton and Company for a reason, and I've been involved in ensuring that you get there, that you understand what this all means. I know it's hard to wrap your head around, but you have to trust me. Caroline shook her head in disbelief. Trust him? How could she trust someone who had kept secrets from her for so long? How could she trust someone who had been watching her like some kind of observer in a grand experiment? She felt sick to her stomach. I don't know what to say, she finally managed, her voice cracking. You've been watching me. You've been in my life and I had no idea. You've been lying to me, Liam. And now you're telling me I'm part of some secret plan. Liam's face twisted with regret, but he didn't back away from the truth. I never meant to lie to you. I never meant to hurt you. But you have to understand, there's more at stake here than you can imagine. If you don't accept what I'm saying, if you don't understand the magnitude of what's happening, you could be in danger. And so could everyone you care about. A chill ran down Caroline's spine. She wanted to ask more questions, but the words felt stuck in her throat. Danger. What kind of danger could she possibly be in? How was any of this real? You're saying I've been groomed for something. And now I'm just supposed to accept this. Caroline's voice was rising now, the anger and confusion she had been holding back beginning to surface. Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? I've spent my whole life trying to build a future, and now you're telling me everything was planned, that nothing is real, that I'm just some piece in a game. Liam sighed deeply, rubbing a hand across his face as though he were exhausted. I know it sounds insane. Believe me, I didn't want you to find out like this. But this is bigger than you or me. This is about the future, about a mission that was started long before either of us were born. And you're at the center of it. Caroline felt her stomach twist in knots. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor as she paced away from the table, trying to catch her breath. Her mind was spinning, but there was one thing she knew for sure. This wasn't how she had imagined her life going. This wasn't the life she had worked for, the life she had built piece by piece. This felt like a nightmare. Caroline, Liam's voice softened, and he reached out to touch her arm gently. I know this is hard, but you need to understand you have a choice. You can walk away from this, but if you do, you may never understand the truth. You may never know why everything's been happening the way it has. Caroline jerked her arm away, shaking her head. I don't know what you're talking about anymore, Liam. You've broken everything I thought I knew. I can't deal with this. Her words were sharp, her heart pounding in her chest as her mind spun faster and faster. Before she could stop herself, she turned and walked out of the cafe, the cold rain greeting her as she stepped into the night. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away. From Liam. From this truth. From everything she thought she understood about herself. But as she walked away, part of her knew that there was no turning back. She couldn't unknow what Liam had just told her. The world she had built, the life she had carefully curated, was a lie, and there were secrets, dangerous, life-altering secrets, that had yet to be uncovered. Chapter 9. A Choice to Make. Caroline's footsteps splashed through the rain-soaked streets of New York, the cold droplets stinging her face as she walked aimlessly. The sharp edge of the rain seemed to mirror the chaos inside her, the confusion, the anger, and the fear all swirling together in a storm. The city around her buzzed with life, people rushing to their destinations, oblivious to the inner war that raged within her. But for Caroline, the world felt muted, like a dream she couldn't wake from. What just happened? She tried to make sense of it, to process what Liam had told her. Every time she thought she could wrap her head around one part of his confession, another question arose, spiraling into something even more disorienting. Liam wasn't just a senior executive at Hinton and Company. He wasn't just the charming man she had slowly grown to trust. No, he was something far more complicated. Someone who had been watching her for years, following her every move like some kind of puppet master. She didn't know what to feel, what to believe. Was he telling the truth? Was everything she thought she knew about her life a lie? And more importantly, why her? What was the plan? What was the mission? She wished she had answers, but they were slipping through her fingers like water. She needed time. Time to think, to clear her head. But the gnawing fear that had settled deep inside her wouldn't let her rest. It felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, suffocating her with every passing second. She finally stopped at a small park, the rain still coming down in a steady drizzle. The trees offered some shelter, though the air was thick and damp. Caroline sank onto one of the benches, her hands trembling as she pulled her coat tighter around her. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in thought, staring at the dimly lit path before her, the distant sound of traffic blurring in her ears. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Text message from Liam. Caroline, I know you need space, but please, when you're ready, let's talk. There's so much more you need to know. I can't do this without you. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She wanted to respond. She wanted to yell at him, tell him everything she was feeling, the betrayal, the confusion, the anger. She wanted to scream. But as much as she wanted to lash out, a part of her couldn't ignore the growing sense that maybe he wasn't lying. Maybe there was truth in what he had said. After all, why would someone go through all this trouble if there wasn't something real behind it? She put her phone down, letting the screen dim as her mind raced. She could walk away from this, cut ties with Liam, go back to the life she had before the secrets, before the mission, before the weight of everything he had revealed. But would she be able to live with herself, never knowing the full story? Was she ready to leave the mystery unsolved, to go back to a life that suddenly felt incomplete? Her chest tightened, the uncertainty gnawing at her. But if I stay, if I try to understand this, to trust him, what does that mean for me? And then there was the most important question of all. Who am I, really? The idea that she could be part of something larger than herself, something with a purpose she hadn't yet discovered, was both thrilling and terrifying. She wasn't just a young professional climbing the ranks at Hinton and Company anymore. She wasn't just Caroline the intern who was making her mark in the business world. She was a part of something bigger. She had always been a part of it. She just hadn't known it yet. The weight of her decision grew heavier with each passing minute. If she stayed, she would be diving into a world she barely understood, a world that might consume her. But if she left, if she walked away now, would she regret it forever? Would she be leaving behind an opportunity to understand who she really was, why she had been brought to New York in the first place? Her thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of her phone again. This time it was a call from Liam. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her heart hammering in her chest. The rain had slowed to a soft patter, but the stillness around her felt deafening. Should I pick up? She stared at the call for what felt like an eternity. She could hear his voice in her head, pleading with her to trust him, to listen to him. Please, Caroline, you're not alone in this. I'll help you understand, but you have to let me. Caroline's fingers shook as she pressed the answer button. Liam, she said, her voice hoarse, uncertain. She hadn't expected to speak to him, at least not this soon. But now that she had, the words seemed harder to form than ever. Caroline, Liam's voice came through the phone, soft and strained. I know you're upset. Understand. But please just let me explain. I need you to understand that I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to protect you. You're in danger, and I'm the only one who can help you through this. Caroline felt a pang of frustration. Danger. What kind of danger, Liam? You haven't told me anything. All I know is that you've been watching me, lying to me, keeping secrets. I don't know what's real anymore. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Liam spoke again, his voice was more hesitant, more vulnerable. I didn't mean for you to find out this way. But everything that's happening now, everything you're feeling, it's only the beginning. I can't explain everything over the phone, but if you trust me, I can show you. I can take you somewhere where you'll get the answers you need. Caroline closed her eyes, the weight of the decision pulling at her from all sides. She wanted answers, but she also wanted to be free from this mess. To live a life unencumbered by secrets, by shadows, by things she couldn't control. But something deep inside her told her that if she turned away now, she might never know what her life was truly meant to be. What's your plan? She asked quietly, her voice steady but wary. What am I supposed to do? Liam's voice softened, filled with resolve. Come with me. I'll show you everything. I'll help you make the right choice. The line went silent for a moment as Caroline thought it over. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken promises and fears. She had no idea what she was stepping into, but deep down she knew one thing. There was no going back now. I'll meet you, she said, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. But if you're lying to me, if this is some kind of game, then I swear to God, Liam, I will never forgive you. Liam's voice crackled with relief, and she could almost hear the tension in his breath as he exhaled. I promise you, Caroline, this is real. I'll never lie to you again. Caroline hung up the phone, standing up from the bench and wiping the rain from her face. As she looked up at the darkening sky, a part of her wondered if she was making the right choice. But another part of her, the part that had always sought the truth, knew that she had no other option. It's time to face the truth. And as she walked away, every step felt like she was moving toward something unknown, something that could change everything. Chapter 10: The Final Choice. The streets of New York had become familiar to Caroline, but tonight they felt different. As she made her way through the city, the lights above her flickered in the foggy mist, casting long, distorted shadows across the sidewalks. The rain had stopped, but the dampness hung in the air, wrapping around her like a heavy cloak. Each step she took felt like it was leading her deeper into a world she didn't recognize, a world where every decision she made seemed to shape the rest of her life. Liam had given her an address, one that led to a small, unassuming building on the outskirts of the city. It looked like any other office building, but something about it made her uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. She had spent so long trying to build her life, a life of independence and control, and now it seemed like everything she thought she knew was crumbling around her. She stood in front of the building, staring up at its cold glass facade. The address Liam had given her was right here, but something felt wrong. Her phone buzzed again, another message from him. I'm here. Come in when you're ready. I'll explain everything, Caroline. I promise. She looked at the message, her fingers trembling as she gripped the phone. There it was again, his promise. She had heard it before, but this time it felt different. The stakes were higher. She was about to make a decision that would change everything, and she still didn't know whether she could trust him. Could she trust anyone? With a deep breath, she pushed open the door to the building and stepped inside. The lobby was empty, save for a few potted plants and an elevator in the corner. The soft hum of the elevator doors opening was the only sound that broke the silence. She hesitated, then walked toward it, feeling her heart race with each step. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have, the claustrophobic space only adding to her unease. When the doors opened, she stepped out into a dimly lit hallway. The walls were painted a dull grayish color, and the only sound was the faint echo of her footsteps as she walked down the corridor. The door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar, and the light from inside spilled out into the hallway. Liam was waiting for her. He was standing by a large desk, his back to her as he stared out of the window, lost in thought. The room was sparsely furnished, but the atmosphere was heavy, like it had been untouched for years. Caroline's breath caught in her throat as she stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. The man she had once trusted, the man she had believed in, was now standing before her like a stranger. He hadn't turned around, hadn't acknowledged her presence, and yet she could feel the weight of his gaze on her, even without looking at him. "Liam," she said quietly, her voice almost drowned by the silence of the room. He didn't turn immediately, but she could see his shoulders tense. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low and solemn. "Caroline, I know this is hard. But you need to understand, everything that's been happening, everything you've been questioning, it's all part of a much bigger picture. And you're at the center of it." Caroline stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She was tired of the secrets, tired of the half-truths. She needed answers, and she needed them now. "I don't know what you're talking about anymore, Liam," she said, her voice breaking through the tension. "You've been lying to me from the start. I don't know if I can believe anything you say anymore." He turned around slowly, and for the first time, Caroline saw the look of guilt on his face. His eyes were tired, almost haunted, and there was a sadness there that she hadn't expected to see. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing as though the weight of his own secrets was too much to bear. "I never wanted to lie to you, Caroline. I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice full of regret. "But the truth is, I've been trying to protect you. From everything that's been happening, from what's coming. And I know I haven't made it easy. But you're the key to all of this. To everything." Caroline's mind raced. The key. What was he talking about? The more he spoke, the less she understood. "Stop, Liam," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "I don't want to hear any more cryptic nonsense. Just tell me what's really going on. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you tell me before?" "I don't understand," she whispered. "What role? What's all of this?" Liam took a step closer, his expression serious, as if every word he spoke carried the weight of something greater than the two of them. "The organization I'm a part of, Hinton and Company, isn't just a company. It's part of something much older, something much more powerful. It's been influencing events for decades, shaping the world in ways you can't even imagine. And you, Caroline, are at the center of it. You were chosen for this, chosen because you have the potential to change everything. But with that power comes danger. There are people who will stop at nothing to control you, to use you for their own purposes." Caroline felt the blood drain from her face. "Chosen? What are you talking about? What power do I have?" Liam's eyes softened, his voice almost pleading. "You have the ability to influence the future, Caroline. To change the course of history. That's why they've been watching you, why I've been watching you. They'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're under their control." She took a step back, her mind reeling. This was too much. She couldn't process it all. The life she had built, the career, the friends, the relationships. None of it seemed real anymore. It was all part of a game she hadn't even known she was playing. "I don't know if I can do this, Liam," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I want to be a part of this." Liam's expression hardened, his eyes locking onto hers with a mixture of resolve and sorrow. "I can't make this decision for you. But you need to understand, if you walk away now, you're walking away from the only chance you'll ever have to make a difference. You're walking away from the truth. And you'll never know what could have been." Caroline stood there, her heart torn between two worlds. The life she knew, the world of security and familiarity, was slipping away. But the life Liam offered her, the life of power, danger, and the unknown, was equally terrifying. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as the weight of the decision pressed down on her. This was it, the moment where everything changed. Finally, she looked at Liam, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm in," she said softly, but with finality. "I'll help you. But on one condition." Liam raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What condition?" "That you never lie to me again. Not about this, not about anything." Liam smiled, his face softening with relief. "I promise. No more lies. Only the truth." And with that, Caroline stepped forward, her heart set on the path ahead, knowing that the world she had known was gone forever. The journey was just beginning.